That's where we started with the D&D system. But then I take inspiration from everything I see, I play, I read, and I build it all together and try to see what can we use here, what can we use there. For me, though, a lot of it was I'm a very cinematic game player, going back to my Star Wars roots, and that, to me, that was one of the big influences of the way I was designing the game.
Yes.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah. And Bill mentioned that Star Wars had just been wrapped up. We'd also done the Call of Cthulhu D20 version, Wheel of Time in D20. So there was a lot of, the D20 system was a really great toolbox for tinkering. So I think that in a lot of ways, the toolbox itself was an inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, here's another question. First of all, thank you so much for D20 Modern. It's been a huge part of my life. I started playing as soon as it was released and continue today, including in some games that they're almost 20 years old. Those games have heavily relied upon Urban Arcana setting, which was a staple of my enjoyment of the D20 Modern system. 4 of my players even sport Knights of the Silver Dragon tattoos in real life during our game.
Oh.
So, not so much a question, but a comment for you guys.
Okay.
Very cool.
Urban Arcana was one of my favorites as well. That was one of that idea actually went back to when we were still at TSR. I pitched an updated version of the Realms that was into the modern world, and I got shot down. So it came back later for this. And it was right around the time that things like the Jim Butcher Dresden books were beginning to become popular. So that was really something that was near and dear to a lot of us, and a number of our original playtest games were in that kind of urban fantasy setup.
Yeah. One point I was pitching, basically the image to start building the game off was the wizard in a leather jacket on a Harley. And that sort of like as that sort of confluence of images and tropes in one place. There was a black and white comic back in the early 80s called Empire Lanes, which was about a group of fantasy characters that find themselves in a modern world. And, they find themselves in a bowling alley, and that's where the title of the book comes from, Empire Lanes. So, including a paladin, that basically will not walk when it says don't walk because that's the law. So.
Let's see, next question, if you could go back and change the design of the 6 original base classes again, what, if anything, is the first thing you might do differently or change? I guess that would be for Jeff.
Man.
Kind of a tough one.
I really don't. I really don't know. I haven't thought about going back and and altering it, because the original 6 ability scores were things that we were very comfortable with as D&D players and allowed ourselves to go out. I probably would stretch out a lot more of the charismatic heroes' abilities, in particularly along the lines of what you can do with charisma. There are several type of designs in the new Everyday Heroes that I think are quite good. The idea of having the smart heroes having a plan, and they have a certain number of plans in their pocket, and they can always work from there. And that gave a lot of hands-on versatility for players today. I probably would do something like that back if I could retrofit it back into the original setting.
Well, you have a great memory, Jeff, because I did run I was running D20 Modern for probably 6 or 8 years after it came out, but that's still 10 years ago, right? I'm casting my mind back to what the characters were.
Yeah, I'm just, because I'm running off memory, and that's not the best thing, so.
Right.
All right, let's try this next question. Please apologize for me, and I'm not sure what this meant. Hope everyone can hear. Maybe repeat the question. Okay, I'm not sure which question that means, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, next step. Howdy, I never got the books, but I was a fan of the MSRD during the 3.5 days. Were any of you involved in creating the SRD for Modern?
No.
I
No, I don't think
reviewed
I
it
was.
before it went out the door. You know, that we got somebody on the team to do the put it together, pull out the stuff that was copyrightable that we didn't want to let everyone else
Right.
have, and
But the rules text was essentially exactly what was in the books.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
And how do you guys feel about the whole experiment with having SRDs and the idea that this kind of core version of the rules is out there for people to play around and build on?
Yeah, I mean, the D20 system was a fantastic toolbox, right? It really lets you just, it was like having a gigantic Lego set. You can build all kinds of stuff out of it. So I think making that available to gamers gamers and publishers to do creative and interesting things was, certainly from where I was sitting, it seemed like it was great creatively, and I think it was good for the business as well. I think it really gave a lot of centrality to D&D and the D20 system in the hobby game industry.
And it created a universal language. For a lot of people, D&D is the universal language. Here, they could basically take it and expand it. One thing I bore these guys to death with is the whole idea that game design is a conversation. And as we design forward, we're looking at what's been done in the past, what we like, what we don't like. Ooh, I really like this project. I know how to fix it. And what the SRD did was it basically made those tools publicly available so that you could see people taking it and going in different places with it. And I thought the ones are, here's my campaign, those were very nice, but the ones that went wild and basically started building out from it, I thought were excellent.
Right. I mean, my bread and butter these days is the Cypher system. I've been at Monte Cook Games for the last 10 years, and we just opened up the Cypher system with an SRD like document.
And
so
I think that'll help
clearly
spread
that's got
it
my
out
support
further.
right there.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Let's see. A question. What was your favorite feature implemented in D20 Modern? I guess we can go through the list here, but we'll go, for me, back to front. Charles, you want to field that first?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I do like the class system because, as we mentioned before, it wasn't just about bringing D&D classes or D&D style class structures to a new genre, like you could do with Star Wars, for example, and build to the tropes that exist within that. You had to be prepared to deal with any sort of modern genre, right? Whether you're doing action adventure stuff or urban fantasy or horror or whatever thing you wanted, you needed to have something that was really, really universal. So I think the way that worked then with the upper level classes, where you've taken 6 levels in those basic classes, then you go into the specialized classes. I think that worked really, really well. I also think that we did a pretty darn good job of integrating firearms into the D20 system in a way that was both, gave them the sort of primacy that they get in modern settings without making them unbalanced or completely ruining the ability to use other things with your characters in that type of setting. So I don't know, boy, I could go on. It's a long list.
All right, Rich, how about you? What's a favorite element from D20 Modern?
It's not universally popular, I know, but I really liked the wealth system.
Yeah. And that sort of descended from the old Marvel systems as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a real challenge.
Another effort to try and catch the universality of it, right? To put it in a world where you're very few transactions are coins for items, but make it available for everything.
And how about you, Jeff? What's a favorite part of the game?
We talked about the classes, we talked about the wealth system. I'm actually going to say the art. I really liked the art and the interior design of the book. It was really nicely laid out. It was a lot of text involved and laid out in such a way that basically was readable and understandable. And particularly the fact that we managed to take our core characters and put them in other outfits, in other genres. We showed Moondog, our tough hero in the character class, and then we showed him 3 or 4 more times, and he was identifiable with the ponytail and everything. But you saw him and you say, oh, he's in this type of role, he's in that type of. It's like actors being able to swap off roles.
Cool. How about you, Bill?
Oh wow, how do I pick a favorite of my my wonderful creation?
It is tough.
We love all our children.
Yes, we do. I mean, to me, the thing that still sticks out is I think it's still eminently playable. It holds up really well. Um, I've run it recently just to show people how it works, and it still plays well. Um, and I really just have a lot of fond memories of putting this particular project together. Uh, it was a fun collaboration to get this thing out the door into the 300 and plus pages that we stuffed into it. So
Did we go over? Did we have to get some more signatures?
we had to ask for more pages. Yes, we did.
All right. Hey, everybody out there who's listening, feel free to throw up some more questions. We'd love to, I can talk to these guys all day, but this is for the patrons who want to pick the brains of these great designers or find out information about your favorite game. So don't be shy, and we'll make sure that we ask these guys. Let's see.
There are a dozen questions in queue. Can you see them?
In the chat.
Okay. I did not see them. Okay, there we got a bunch. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. How would you choose to implement psionics in 5e?
Psionics. Let me remember. Oh,
we did have Agents of Psi.
yeah. So I mean,
that was
we
yours,
really,
Charles, wasn't it?
No, I don't think it was.
Okay.
We basically wanted to make sure we had some core settings for people to get an idea of what the game could do. In addition to just plain old action adventure, we did the Urban Arcana, we did the psionics, and we kind of modeled that after things like scanners and psychop and things along those lines. We tried to see what psionics was done like in the second edition D&D. It didn't quite work the way we'd liked it to, so we made some adjustments, but I don't remember the basics of the system. I'd have to go dig it up. But that's kind of my recollection. Anybody else remember anything?
We were talking about things we would change for the modern world. I'd probably go with more of a skill-based psionic system, as opposed to what we had back in second edition, which was, it's a different type of spell casting. We saw that in 2 and 3.
All right, real quick around the horn. What archetype is either your favorite or that you would choose to represent yourself as a character? Bill?
Oh, favorite. I'd probably like playing the fast hero.
How about you, Jeff?
Moondog, tough hero.
All right, Rich?
I really don't remember. It's been 20 years. I'm sorry.
No problem. Charles?
Yeah, also fast hero.
Speed.
Either a gunslinger direction or a roguey type of character is usually what I was playing.
Cool. All right, let's see. Do you think that this project, did you think doing this project back then has influenced your game design and decisions today?
Oh, definitely. Everything I've ever done builds upon the next thing and adds to the next thing. I think, as Jeff was saying, design is a conversation, and you don't stop having that conversation until it's over, and it's not over yet.
Well, there's a question from me. I really enjoy D20 and was able to remove gameplay from the fantasy and into the urban modern timeline. With that in mind, do you plan on possibly remaking Everyday Heroes Future / Everyday Heroes Past? Yeah, I'll say we're definitely open to a lot of things that the fans would like to see. I'd really enjoy doing some historical periods, and I'd enjoy doing some future stuff. Although with future stuff, you have to decide. There's so many directions, right? So you've got to kind of pick one and pick a focus and go for it. We're definitely looking at doing some an urban arcana-like setting for maybe 2024, which means we'll start working on it earlier than that. So because a lot of people have asked for that. So I think that's our first kind of original IP direction that we'll look at. All right, let's see. Next. Oh, go ahead.
A lot of our adventures that are coming up are based on movie IPs. And I'll just throw out Cowboys and Aliens. We get future and past.
Ooh, that would be a lot of fun. That would be really cool. A historical setting with science fiction added to it. Let's see. What rules were closest to going in a different direction? Why did the ones you have printed get chosen? So, yeah, what's something that you kind of tussled over, had a tough decision, and then went X direction that you can remember?
Wealth. Charles, tell them about wealth.
Well, I mean, there's not much to tell other than the fact that that was one that we tussled over. Like, I think we went through a lot of equipment lists with dollar values on them, and then tried to figure out how characters were going to have those resources, and then ultimately kind of said, you know what, this just needs to be, it needs to be some form of test or some sort of check, like you do with a skill or other, you know, type of ability in the system. And then coming up with something that again was like a linear system didn't work. It needed to be non-linear, and so there was an awful lot of like going back and forth on that, and you know, it was really easy to go overboard, and then it was really easy to go too simple, and either end you could end up with things that were very gameable by people, because you also wanted to make it something that served the game but didn't become a game that players wanted to play. Like, how can I get my wealth score up or whatever. So that was definitely one that man, we went through a bunch of iterations on that, and also an awful lot, because it is a big philosophical divergence to go with something where you're rolling against rolling a check versus just marking numbers off your sheet for how much money you spend. And it took us, there were a lot of conversations about how to make that work.
Well, one thing we ultimately wanted to do was avoid it being encumbrance for the D20 Modern. It's the idea of, like, because then because the system is too complex, it gets ignored. So
yeah, makes sense. I'll see a question for me. How much of a creative constraint did using 5e end up being compared to what you expected? You know, I think it was about as I expected. I'm pretty familiar with 5e and I like the system a lot. So I didn't feel like it put a lot of constraints. And, you know, we had an early design meeting and we agreed that we would change 5e where we felt it would benefit the game, and then we would stick to it otherwise. And so I didn't feel too constrained. There were maybe a couple times where we went back and forth. We thought, should we change this or should we keep it the same? But we pretty quickly reached decisions on those, so it wasn't too hard. I think it's a very flexible and easy system to work with. And it really, although each edition has its own thing, there's a through line all the way from the earliest days of D&D today, and that core system, roll a d20, check it against a number. It's just very flexible, and you could do all kinds of different things with it. So I found it pretty easy to work with. All right, next question. What rules were, I did that one. Okay, understanding that all rule systems have limitations, part of the dream of running everyday heroes like D20 Modern is to bring some of your favorite novels and worlds to life. Were there any of your favorite book series that you didn't think would fit well during development? Okay, and I'll run this guy by you guys too, because I'm sure you were trying to like make sure D20 Modern could hit all the modern genres. Was there anything you found kind of a challenge or difficult to adjust for?
No, I think the D20 system as developed for 3rd edition and beyond was really versatile, and with some modifications like we've done in each of the books that Charles mentioned earlier, there's nothing that we weren't able to replicate and turn into a game system, at least from my opinion.
Are there any settings you'd love to see turned into a game that haven't had the treatment yet?
That's the kind of stuff I don't like to answer, because that gives ideas to people. I don't do that.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. Let's see, another question. What was your favorites of the published campaign settings for D20 Modern? Or did you have a special unique home campaign that was unpublished?
My campaign that I ran for a long time, first as playtest, and then for several years after the game came out, was an apocalyptic game. So D20 Apocalypse was definitely the book that was closest to my heart personally.
Yeah, for me, it was Urban Arcana. That's really the place I like to play a mix of modern and fantasy.
How about you, Rich?
Oh, I agree with Bill.
Jeff?
And I would go with Urban Arcana, and I think one of the things that made it particularly good was the fact we could loot the core D&D system so easily.
That was nice.
The
Need
Mind
a
Flayer
monster, grab the
Minister.
monster
Yep,
manual, the whole set.
exactly.
Yeah, and to circle back, that's one of the great things about working with the D20 system, whatever edition you're doing, there's a lot of interoperability. And so just for fans, it makes everything wide open. And you can bring in stuff really easily or take stuff and put it out to what you like playing. And so I think that's really a great advantage of working in a system that a lot of other people are working in. All right, next question. Go ahead.
I just want to throw out there, just sort of like tangential to that, but like early on, I can't remember if this is when the book was out or when it was still in development or whatnot, but I ran a big event. There was an event that Andy Collins, Gwen Kestrel held at their house every year, whatnot. And I remember running, I took just straight up the 3rd edition Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil and kitted a bunch of pre-gens out as a modern tactical team, just fully kitted with everything that best, your highest end stuff you could have, and sent them in there. And that was a lot of fun. But and it really showed, again, that interoperability, that ability to just take things from everything and put them together. It also showed that modern characters have a lot of advantages and also a lot of disadvantages in a high magic setting.
I used to do that with Ravenloft i6. I ran that in Torg, D20 Modern, D&D, Star Wars, with a few variations. That's always fun.
Yeah.
All right, next question. When you were creating the Moreau monster and character options, had you tried to get permission from TMNT, that's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle licensing?
No, because they weren't part of my thinking at the time at all.
Okay. And I think Palladium.
I love that property. I do. Yeah. I love TMNT. In fact, I think I have a copy of the Palladium Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles right behind me right now. But I honestly, that was not part of my thinking when I was working on the Moreaus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I played that back in high school in the gymnasium at lunch. It was great. It was a good game for just sitting down, playing for a half hour, and then going back to class.
And for a while, comic books and Saturday morning animation was overrun with anthropomorphic action characters. Biker mice from Mars come to mind.
Oh yeah, I remember them. All right, let's see. The Shadow Chaser storyline from Polyhedron magazine. Did that fall into Urban Arcana?
No, that was more horror. I wrote that. Did we touch a bit on that in the core book, or was that one of the leftovers?
Shadow Chasers was one of it, and it was very Buffy-ish. So
right, and I just expanded upon it for the Polyhedron article. I mean, they're in the same vein, but I wanted it to be a little more horror than the fantasy D&D in the modern world. So.
Right, and I think maybe we can squeeze in one more question here. Let me look, there's a couple of them left. Did you ever consider doing any D20 Modern content designed for solo RPG play?
I don't really remember talking about that.
Yeah, that was a hard sell. I mean, we did a couple of solo things along the way. Alternity had a fast play book that was a solo thing, as well as
Marvel Superheroes did it at least once.
Marvel, but we didn't have a big audience. At least we didn't feel we had a big audience for that kind of a product. We did a little bit of that in the magazines. I remember I did another alternity solo play game adventure in Dragon, I think it was. Um, but no, not as a product. Just we didn't have the audience back then that they have at the moment. So
Yeah, makes sense.
And we also had the Choose Your Own Adventure books as well that were working very well in that space.
Were there ever any D20 Modern from any of the segments, like Choose Your Way Adventure books or anything like that?
no, those were mostly
Not for
done
a
by
long
the time we got to the
Right.
D20 system stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I love those things. So cool. All right. Well, gentlemen, I don't want to keep you too far past your time. Let's just
Hey,
go around the
Sid.
table if you have any final remarks. Yeah, Dave.
One thing,
Yeah.
we got a lot of questions about everyday heroes here. So after
Okay.
you give final remarks, would you mind sitting around and allowing people to ask questions about everyday heroes?
Yeah, there'd be no problem. Happy to do that.
Awesome. Actually, there's one question on the list I actually want to know the answer for. The
Oh,
origins
okay.
of the Hoffman Institute.
All right.
I made
Did that
made
come from
that up.
Alternative? Yeah.
Where is that from?
Oh,
I made it
it
up.
was one of our good guy organizations. So
Yeah,
okay.
we needed an institute. You know, I was thinking a little bit like Xavier's School for Mutants and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, we needed something and I made it up. That's how I do stuff.
I was just curious. I didn't, have.
Got it, Joe. All right.
Mhm.
All right, gentlemen. I'll just go around the horn if there's any last thing you want to say. Bill?
Just glad to see that people are still excited about something that we did 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And I wish you luck with the new product. So good luck.
Thank you. Jeff?
I'm just very happy that people have remembered the game and have been playing it all these years and enjoying it. So that's I'm delighted about that. And I do like hearing about your character. So
Excellent. Rich?
I have to echo what Bill and Jeff said.
Yeah, and I hate to be non-creative in this regard, but yeah, it is super gratifying that people are still enjoying it, and both it's have their fond memories of its original iteration, or maybe are still playing it and then seeing new life and new iteration.
Yeah. And yeah, I think as designers, one of the greatest joys is always to see people playing and having fun. It just gives you a great feeling. That's what you're
Absolutely.
doing. So, all right. Well, thank you all very, very much. And you may return to your lives and meals and so forth. I will continue to answer questions for folks.
well, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you,
good night,
guys.
everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
I have to figure out where the off button is.
Yeah.
All right, Sig. Can you believe we had a bunch of questions just for us?
Yeah, pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. And so my name is Dave Scott. I'm the owner of Evil Genius Games. Sig is one of our lead designers and responsible for a lot of the amazing things that you've seen in that core rule book. So I think, we're going to answer questions until you guys get tired of us. I mean, if you're asking them, we'll answer them. One quick question for you, Sig, is what is your favorite archetype in class?
That's a good question. Let's see. So I have a soft spot for the icon because, which is one of our charismatic heroes, because I like to play silly, goofy people when I role play sometimes. And the artist who came back to do Johnny Blaze, I just love the way the guy looks. I have heart-shaped glasses exactly like that character does. So that's kind of a soft spot for me. I also like to play strong heroes. When we're doing the play tests, I love playing the brawler to just smash the shiv out of things. Break doors, and you're like, oh, there's a wall there. No problem, right? Crush. So I think those are kind of my favorite. I like loud, wild characters or kind of funny, charismatic characters. So.
Yeah, what I love about it is, and I have so many that I really can't choose one, but what I love about it is that every single time someone plays a class, I'm like, oh, this class is broken. And my whole theory is if every class is broken, then it's probably doing its job. Smart heroes are awesome. I love just sort of the mastermind, which is just totally a narrative driven character. I think you gotta play, if you ever get a chance, the master, the wise master. It was sort of a weird thing where we took the monk out of D&D and we split him in two, because we said, well, there's like the movies like Jackie Chan, right, where he's just extremely dexterous, and then there's like the movies like Jet Li where he's mystical. So like you had to break him up into two different martial arts styles. We had a lot of debate over it, but I think the wise master is a fun character. All right, so quite a few guys asked about urban arcana. All right, here's the deal. I probably fielded 100 questions about urban arcana. Yes, we're gonna make it. The reason why we have not made it yet, and Brooke, you had alluded to this, the reason why we had not made it yet was because we were actually working with Will Smith to try to get the Bright license. And it turned out that while we were doing it, the writer and the showrunner for Bright got caught up into the Me Too movement and got persona non grata. And so Netflix could not get a hold of the guy to give us the rights for Bright. So unfortunately, we were this close to being able to announce Bright, and just from a politics perspective, it got completely trashed. And so we will be producing something else. The big question is, will we find another property like maybe The Magicians or something, or will we just go ahead and do it on our own, which is probably the most likely of all scenarios. Gosh, there were so many. Yes, urban arcana. Yes, urban arcana.
It is the number one thing people focus about. So yeah, it's gonna happen because we want to make people happy. So
Yes. Are we gonna create a sort of monster manual for everyday heroes? What do you think, Sig? Do you think we should create like a bestiary of some sort?
I think it would be cool. I mean, we're definitely, to circle back to something we talked about before, we'll have an SRD, and so we're gonna have creatures from all our books will have NPCs in them, and so we'll collect those. I think because Everyday Heroes, the core system is about modern day, having a monster manual is a little, like it's not a lot of monsters, right? Although we did put some in there because Cooper, our other lead designer, is a great NPC generator. The man can crank them out, and they're all really cool. And so we definitely put a bunch of the ones that he created in there to kind of have a little rogues gallery. But to really make a lot of monsters and stuff, I think you needed direction. And so we'd have to kind of pick some genres and kind of focus in on that. It'd be fun to do. And I think Goober would be the one to do it because he's amazing with the critters.
Yeah, if you guys get a chance, flip to the back of the book and look at God from Beyond and Entity from Beyond. When I first read the draft, I'm like, what in heaven's bells is this? And he fought for it. He's like, we have to put it in there. And so that's why it's there.
Yeah, we put them into the play tests, and people had a lot of fun with that one. And I ran a couple of those, and yeah, it was great. It was a great monster to use. And I'm working on Kong Skull Island, and I've cooked up some just absolutely evil, terrifying monsters for that. Since they're absolutely enormous and scary in the movie, I made sure that they feel that way in the game too. If you happen to encounter them as a player, I suggest running away a lot.
In fact, Sig has an entire paragraph saying it's okay to run away sometimes because everything on Skull Island is designed to kill you.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous place.
All right, here's another question. So what do you feel the biggest pitfalls are that DMs may run into when creating a campaign for Everyday Heroes?
Biggest pitfall. I would say, my number one suggestion for modern is tone is pretty important. So if you're going to set up your game, think a little bit about what kind of tone you want to set. Everyday Heroes has, as a default, has a kind of broad action tone, not hyper realistic, but we try to cover kind of a big gamut. So when you set up your game, think about what tone you want, whether you want it strict and realistic or whether you want it broad and kind of fun and campy. And that's going to help a lot, because if you set up a realistic tone and you don't tell your players and they make campy characters, they're going to run roughshod all over your Melu. So you want to all get together and figure that out. So I think that's probably the most important thing.
All righty. Let's see here. What are you guys most excited to see in a modernized for the current audience? 5e is arguably the most widespread iteration of the D20 system. So new players like JJ Jimenez, hopefully I said your name right, and old players get to visit D20 Modern. All right. So what were you most excited about modernizing when you created the new book?
Ah, gotcha. Okay. Well, for me, why is it modernizing? I wanted to, my expertise kind of previous to this was feats. I spent a number of years doing something called the Netbook of Feats. So when the OGL license first came out, me and a bunch of other people decided we were going to make the biggest and best collection of feats ever. And so we did that. So I spent many years working on feats. And so when I came to this project, I was like, all right, so yeah, 5e feats are optional. They're not going to be optional in Everyday Heroes, and we're going to use them to the very best of their abilities and mechanic. So we're going to do multi-classing with feats, and we're going to make these things called basic feats, which just help you round out your characters and all the basic elements. And so that was what I was sort of most excited to take my expertise and add to the game. And I'm really happy with the way that came out.
Yeah, for me, it was the wealth system. I know Rich said he loved the wealth system. That was the worst part of the game for me. But, you know, I just in my head, I had this concept that like you could pretty much get anything, you know, within 2-day shipping. And we should just make it very easy for you to do that. I mean, the reality is this, like, if you wanted to buy 100 guns, you can just kind of buy 100, well, maybe not 100 because there are some laws, but like if you wanted to buy 10,000 bullets, you can just go buy 10,000 bullets. And we wanted you to have to do that. If you want a crowbar, you just walk down to the hardware store and buy a crowbar. And we didn't want equipment to be an impediment in any way. So that was the big thing that I wanted to modernize is, guess what, guys? Amazon exists.
Yeah, and also just like people have tons of things in their homes in the real world, right? Like you're like, oh, yeah, sledgehammer, I got one in the garage, right? So yeah, if you are a person of the means to own such a thing, you can just say, I own such a thing. You don't need to write down everything in your house on your character sheet, right? So we wanted to keep the system loose and flexible to allow for these things and not to be an impediment to storytelling.
So this is a question from Matthew Agler. He obviously loves Urban Arcana, like all of you apparently do. And he said, will Everyday Heroes shift magical abilities to a higher level, or will it treat it like a feat?
You know, I got to say, we haven't decided yet. There's a lot of possibilities. When we made the archetypes, we did them intentionally to each have some different mechanics so that we could build classes off of them. It's possible we could make new magical archetypes as well with a magic system that you then build up on top of. But we've used, like in the Crow, we use the Wise Heroes focus point system as a kind of a power pool, a little bit like old school psionics or something that you can draw for, spend the points to activate different powers or spells or whatever it is that you have available to you. And then the Smart Hero is a little more like a classic wizard in that they have a series, or maybe a sorcerer, they have a series of very elaborate plans that they can unveil and act upon, but then they have a limited number of those that they can do each day. And then finally, we have the Charming Hero, who has a dice pool mechanic of dice that they can spend and then roll the dice to add to different effects or enact special abilities that then use those dice outcomes to power what happens. And we very specifically made those 3 different mechanics as a kind of core base so that when we do magic or psionics or almost, you know, any kind of thing that requires a limited resource ability, we'd have these 3 archetypes to build off of and do something with that. But I haven't thought hard about which one we would use for each thing. We just kind of pick the best. And if none of them fit, we would make a new archetype that works, that encapsulates the idea of magic in that world, I think.
All righty, this question is a good one here. What was it like working with Stan? His name appears in some of his, this is from Josh Morrison Cleary, from my favorite books, but he seems to be a mysterious figure.
Maybe. Stan's a good friend of mine, and I play Call of Cthulhu with him, for years now. So he's just a good friend. It's fun to work with him. It's always great, kind of, you have a good friend, and then you get to work on with them on a project. And I've worked with Stan on some other projects. He's brought me in to write some stuff for other people occasionally. He's just a joyous, nice, wonderful human being, and he helped us organize our meetings and stay on track, just kind of giving us sage wisdom about the process of making games. And he's not too mysterious. You can find him on Facebook, and he's got YouTube channel where or I think it's on Facebook actually, where he draws pictures live, and you can follow him. And he has a podcast about sumo wrestling, so he's out there.
Yes, he's a great guy. Alrighty, is Everyday Heroes open source? Can I publish my own resources for the system on platforms like DriveThruRPG? The answer is yes, it is open source, and we would love for every single one of you guys to publish stuff for it. Like, we want this to be the de facto modern day system, and if you've got better ideas on how to implement stuff or different genres or different types of campaign settings, by all means do it. But not only that, but we're also here to help support it. We have our third-party publishing, which allows us to help you sell the product and get the word out about it. So we would love people to write on this platform for sure.
Yep, absolutely. I love to see, already our fans have started posting classes that they've created and things like that. And I love to see that stuff. And, if you tap me and I got time, I'll read it and give you feedback, or just, go, cool, that's awesome. Because I like to see what people are doing with it.
All right. Just looking at a bunch of questions. Did you ever think about using Pathfinder as your rule system? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I like Pathfinder, by the way. I wrote a bunch of feat books for Pathfinder, so I like the system. But 5e is just kind of the most popular, and that's the one we were all most familiar with from our own play. So we went with that.
By the way, I'm a huge Pathfinder player. I prefer Pathfinder 2nd edition to D&D 5e. But
okay.
There was more familiarity around 5e, and obviously it's a little bit more popular. So that's the reason why. Here's another question, Sig. Are you thinking about doing more mutant sources, like from Gamma World?
That would be awesome. We've got a couple in the book. We've got one like super mutant. But yeah, I'd like to. I love, it would be fun. And we talked about this a little bit. You may see some of that in Total Recall, because, mutations from Mars's unique radiation are part of that setting. And so we're going to have some stuff. And with all of these books, we try to design the rules and mechanics so that you can pull them out of Total Recall or Escape from New York or whatever, and put them into your own setting and use them in a different context. So if you want to do the radiated wasteland, the material that's in Total Recall will probably be pretty useful for that. So we'll have some stuff about mutations and what they do, and probably even like, kind of some random mutation, because that's a fun part of mutation, right? What's going to happen, and the surprise element. So we'll probably have some stuff like that in there. That book hasn't gotten too deep into design yet, but we do have a lot of ideas for
it. Yeah. We've been considering any smaller products that are digital only. Or are you only going to release larger cinematic adventures? I can take that.
Yeah.
We'd love to. We'd love to do some more stuff like what Pathfinder does with Pathfinder Society. We are on slate this year to publish 3 sort of 5,000 word mini adventures. We're actually talking to GTM Monthly about creating a mini adventure that gets posted in there. But we have a small team, and the more we do that, the less we spend time writing Urban Arcana or doing some of the larger projects. So we would love to be able to support the ecosystem, your ecosystem, on that, rather than us work on some of these smaller projects. All right, the next question is, will Kong Skull Island Pacific Rim lead to more kaiju adventures? I sure hope so. I mean, we've introduced this new concept, will be called Titanic Scale. And that is an opening for a lot of really interesting story development. And Sig, do you want to talk a little about what Titanic Scale is?
Yeah, sure. So the idea is that normal people, let's say Rambo, goes up against Godzilla. And I mean, Rambo's a great guy, but he's not doing much to Godzilla, right? I don't care how much you shoot him with a machine gun. You can bring in your helicopter. Not much is going to occur there. However, Godzilla could swat him out of the sky pretty easily. He's going to need to run away, right? So Titanic scale stuff is just on a whole nother level than normal scale things. And so the two can interact, and we've got stuff in the book about how you can interact in a kind of nice, fun, and realistic way. So you can be involved in a battle with Titans at a normal scale, but you're not going to just be like trading blows. So we've developed a system, and the cool, fun thing about this system is that the statistics for Titanic scale stuff is not really different than the statistics for normal scale stuff. So if you want to suddenly have a Titanic rhinoceros, for whatever reason, you can take the rhinoceros stat block, you just make a couple changes, usually basically on movement speed and range. There's a little bit of conversion that we do. And then that's that. You've got yourself a Titanic scale rhinoceros. And so you could do battle with Kaiju or with one of the Titans from the Monsterverse. So it's really easy and it's really fun to be able to convert things up and down if you want. And you can even have a game about shrinking or growing things. Just a lot of cool options because this
Honey, I Shrunk the Kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do we not think about that for a cinematic adventure? It's like brilliant.
Yeah, totally. So, and I have to give Goober credit. He was the one who just was like, yeah, let's just do it like this. And I'm like, yeah, that's going to work great. Like, it's actually really simple and easy. Now, we do have a little bit of conversion. Like, if you really want to do some things, I think you need to do 100 points of damage to do 1 point of damage to a Titanic creature. So we got a little bit of stuff like that. So if you really want to, switch it around, say like the battleship could work on the Titanic scale, right? Or you could stand it up on the normal scale and have it interact. But generally speaking, they're kind of in separate buckets. But Kong Skull Island in the Monsterverse, you do have a lot of people interacting. And so what we've got is like, as the Titans knock down buildings and they create havoc and things like that, there's a whole set of rules for how you deal with that in combat when the building is crushing. What happens during that round of combat? We have these things called combat complications. And they're kind of from our chase system, and everybody's got to deal with this. But it also creates opportunities that you can, shove your enemy in the way of some kind of danger under those conditions and take advantage of the chaos that's going on. So I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun. But you can totally, the way we've written it up, you can totally, if you really want to, you can take the Kaiju from Pacific Rim, and you could take some Titans out of the Monsterverse, and you can see who wins. And we give you the ability to do that if you want it.
All righty. Here's another question. What are your thoughts about using new ability scores for setting elements like honor, sanity, and wealth as suggested by the 5e DMG?
That's really interesting. I haven't thought about it too much. And we haven't done too much of that. I've thought actually a lot about sanity systems, because I love to play Call of Cthulhu, and so of course I'm going to think about how everyday heroes could be used to play in that setting and what you would do with sanity, and I have my own ideas around that. I think it makes sense. I tend to approach each system like what is it in the real world or in the imaginary world that I'm trying to simulate, and then like how can a mechanical system best support that, rather than sort of say here's the mechanical system and here's the idea and how do I jam them together. So I tend to take creative freedom in that, and that's what I would encourage other designers to do. To make a core ability score, I tend to avoid it, because honestly, if there's one thing in the d20 system that's gotten a little weird over the years, it's always been the ability scores. The translating the 3 to 18 into a bonus on a roll has always been a little awkward part of the game. But it's a traditional part that we keep because it's part of the Melu and it's just the language of that game system. But I would avoid it for making new mechanics, to be honest.
All right. Another question from James Friery. How are you handling balance in the cinematic adventure, since they all have different authors, but theoretically should be able to cross over?
So game balance, yeah. I would say, to me, game balance is a little bit of an art, and it's one of those places where the game master has to come in because there's a wide range in the skill of players. And Everyday Heroes is a game that I designed to be played casually or to be played tactically, right? Because there's both kind of players, and I want them both to have a lot of fun. So you don't have to be a super genius to play Everyday Heroes well. But if you are a very clever person, you can definitely get some advantages that a person who's playing a more relaxed style isn't going to have in combat. So the game, it's very hard to absolutely say this counter is going to work perfectly for every party. So the game master's got to be in there paying attention to who they're playing with and making sure things are going to come out kind of the way they want to be, whether they want it to be challenging or an easy victory or whatever the case is. That said, Goober is a real genius at NPC design, and he's designed our CR system. We're using the 5e CR system, but he's designed his own tables for balancing encounters and calculating how many enemies you should have of what CR for players, and he's really good at that. And his table in the book, I think, is probably the best table of that sort that's been developed, and so it's really helpful for our designers to put the encounters together. And I always check everything I do against his stuff to see where it's laid out. So we tried to put a lot of attention to the tools in the core game to help people do that, and that helps our designers too to put these together.
I think you might be asking, that's great, but I think you might be asking a different question, which is
okay.
how balanced is each cinematic adventure since the authors are different to one another? And the answer is that Sig and Goober design the rules mechanics for every single cinematic adventure.
That's
so
true.
Those two work together to make sure that the games work and are interoperable, even though the adventure designer might be different for each cinematic adventure.
Yeah. So we're kind of the leads on each of those products, and we split them up. We did a bidding between Goober and I to determine which properties we would get, so we'd each get stuff that we like. And yeah, we try to make sure, and then we trade once we've written them to each go over each other's work to make sure we're all in sync and that we're doing everything right. So yeah, that's very true. Good point.
Great. All righty. A couple of nice comments. Thank you for bringing Everyday Heroes to us. I'm working on a Shadow Chasers S campaign, and also had some of my D&D players make characters that they were excited to play. Edward, you're welcome.
Sweet.
GTA, is that a gaming universe? That would be awesome. I just talked to the GTA people at Take-Two. Maybe. Oh, this is interesting. I noticed that there's not an SUV on the vehicle list. Do you think that a stat for the truck might be the right match? Or do you think that stats for the truck need to be tweaked?
Yeah, see, I don't have it open. I think that's going to be pretty close. I would think, our vehicles are kind of rough estimates. I think actually the SUV, the other one you could use is I think there's like a Humvee on there. So if you want a more sort of robust one, that would be a pretty good choice. It might, without the book open, I forget exactly where each of those vehicles is. Goober did the vehicles, so I'm a little less familiar with them than he is.
Yeah, we got to take a look at that. I have no idea why we don't have the SUV on there. We actually had a very long debate about whether or not we should put a shopping cart on the vehicle.
Yeah, we had to throw a few fun ones in, but yeah, the core rule book, there was a lot of stuff. We actually did quite a bit more equipment than you see in the book, and more of a bunch of things. And we had to, because we've got a page count to make, we had to trim a few things down, or we said, well, this is a little too similar to this, and so we just tried to have each thing be kind of unique and different that was in the list. And so if a few things like the truck and the SUV and the Humvee were all a little too close, we pared it down so that we had just kind of a little more specific targets for each thing.
All right, we're down to our last question. Question. All right, so are you guys still shopping for a new bunch of cinematic adventures, or are you looking at original worlds for the next round? That's a good question. My big vision was that we would publish a bunch of cinematic adventures every year. But now that we're in execution mode, I don't know if that's the greatest idea. number one. And number two is that you guys really want Urban Arcana really bad. So I think what we're going to do next year is we're going to announce less cinematic adventures, probably more like on the order of 4. And then we're going to spend more time working on the original, our original properties, as well as there's still more story to be told in Escape from New York, Kong Skull Island, Pacific Rim. So we actually might double down on some of that stuff since we still have the rights to those licenses. Oh, wow. Okay. Big Trouble in Little China. Yes, we would love that too, although it's been licensed up and down. All these came in the last minute. Any suggestions on how to make use of professions in a setting where many of those formal jobs don't exist anymore?
Well, one of the things we try to do is because profession is such a broad category, for the book, I actually designed a whole bunch of like very specific professions within categories, but it was too much for the core book. So we went with broad categories of professions, but we very specifically wanted that profession building system in there so people can pretty quickly make their own professions. They're like, oh, I don't see anything in the list that's exactly right for my character idea. So we have a mechanical guideline for making new professions that if you follow it will be perfectly balanced with all the other ones. And you can mix and match pieces if you want from them, and that should work out fine. Just check the point allocation and it should be good. And you'll find that in the books that we're doing the cinematic adventures, you'll see much more specific professions than you're going to see in the core rulebook because they're about that world and bringing that world to life. So it's a little bit of a different approach. But I think kind of the sky's the limit with professions. You can take them in any direction you like. And I built them to be very flexible, the same with backgrounds, which are simpler, but are also designed to be build your own and to give a lot of creative freedom to people who make products to put them in.
Yeah. All right. Last one, and then we've got to get going. Firefly. So we do not. One thing you'll notice is that we ended at level 10. And the reason was because we really wanted to respect the power behind a level 10 through 20 character, meaning the wuxia period, right? Where they're bigger than life. And so there's lots of room for storytelling when we start taking a look at science fiction, maybe even a superhero campaign setting, and other things along those lines. And so right now we do not have plans for a science fiction setting. We consider ourselves modern. But you never know. In the future, we might, and maybe Firefly, although that, gosh, that's been done to death, or something close to it. Who knows? There's a lot of really exciting science fiction settings that we might be able to hang our hat on.
Well, we do have Total Recall, which is pretty science fiction-y, I think. So.
Well, but what I love about Total Recall and why I think it's more modern is because it's in the version of transhuman space. Mm-hmm. Which is a type of science fiction I love, which is like there are no really aliens. It's all just humans doing stuff to humans within our solar system.
Yeah, sure. And there's no starship battles, yeah. So
yeah, so I kind of think of that as modern or near modern, as opposed to like you said Star Trek where you've got hyperdrives or if you're in a whole nother universe like in Star Wars. So who knows? Who knows? We'll get there. All right, folks. Thank you very much for joining. The next one we're going to do is with Stephen S.D. Knight, who is the writer-director of Pacific Rim 2 Uprising. And thank you all for joining us. Take care. And I promise to end this in a very respectable way.